Welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Renergize Professional Coaching. We appreciate you listening in and learning with us. The stories and leadership tips you hear will help you become a great leader. Listen intentionally. Now, to our host, Sean Olson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the newest episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast. I'm glad that you are here with us today. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you know every time a new episode comes out. The Intentional Leader Podcast is where you hear the real stories of normal people just like you who have become extraordinary leaders. You'll learn some valuable lessons from their lives, lessons you can apply to become the best leader you were created to be. When you become an intentional leader, lives are changed. I'm your host, Sean Olson. I'm an executive coach, business owner, author, and speaker, and I'm glad to have you here today. Today, we have a wonderful guest, Dr. Renee Thompson. She is a nurse who got a good taste of the industry and realized that she wanted to really tackle the issue of bullying and incivility in the healthcare industry. As a result of that, she's now a business owner of the Healthy Workforce Institute, and she is an author. And listeners, you're going to love her and her story, but the impact that she is having. And this goes way beyond healthcare. That's where her focus is, but this is in life in general, no matter where your job is and even in your families. Dr. Renee Thompson, welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sean. I've been looking forward to our conversation. And, I always think about the listener who really needs to hear this at that moment. And so I can't wait for our conversation to talk about my journey and trying to tackle this age-old problem, that we've seen in healthcare. And I appreciate that you said, even if you don't work in healthcare, these same principles apply outside of healthcare. Okay. It's the same principles.
Absolutely. And listeners, you know that life is about relationships and networks. And Renee and I met a couple of years ago. Ironically, when we both wrote our first books, we had the same book coach. And that's how I became aware of who Renee was. And now, because my company does work in healthcare, her company does all the work in healthcare, we have crossed paths over some conferences. And actually just saw one another about a month and a half ago down in New Orleans, Louisiana at a great conference. So, Renee, you're familiar with our show and that we open up with really the same open-ended question of just, we want to get to know Renee, your professional path, but with that professional path, the leadership lessons learned along the way. So tell us about Renee.
Yes. Well, been a nurse for 32 years. And I always say I've done everything you can do as a nurse. You started out at the bedside, as most nurses do, but then I always got to a point where I wanted more, or I thought, what else could I do? I'm one of these people that as soon as I master something, it's not to say that I get bored, because you work in healthcare, there's no boredom there. There's always something. But I thought, what else could I do? And so I started working in home care. I thought, well, let me try that. So I was a home care nurse for a while, and then I got lured over to a managed care company. Yes, I moved over to the dark side.
Yes.
Started working for a managed care company. But I tell you what, Sean, I learned more about the delivery of healthcare in that role. And I was a quality manager. I did, case management, comprehensive disease case management. I did a lot. I learned more about how healthcare is delivered from that managed care company than any other role that I had in healthcare. And it really helped me to see things from sort of that 360 perspective.
Nice.
So after I was in that role for a while and mastered that, I really missed patient care. I missed being in that patient environment. And what I wanted to do was become an educator. I was in a master's program to get my master's in education. And I remember I heard about these education positions at this one hospital near where I lived. And I applied. They said, well, you don't have your master's yet, so you can't be in education. But we have this great unit director role. So it was being basically a nurse manager of a department. I thought, well, being a leader in the department. And I'm like, hey, sure, I'll do it. Well, Sean, let's just say I became the manager of a 35-bed unit and found out very quickly that I was now responsible for a department that had the worst reputation in the entire 700-bed hospital, and
My
I was the
goodness.
sixth leader in 6 years. So I had never seen such horrific behaviors from adult professionals in my entire life. And so I lasted 14 months. I became manager number 7.
My
And
goodness.
from there, I left. I went back to the bedside, and I did that for a little while, and then became an educator. Got my master's, did some education, ended up in a corporate position. So I was, again, in a leadership role. But, when I left that frontline manager role, for years, I felt like a failure. That I guess I'm not good at leading people because I just was not successful.
Right.
And then I got older and wiser, as we all do. And I realized, wait a minute, I'm not a failure. I'm smart. I can learn. I just wasn't equipped. And so then I decided that I never wanted another leader to feel like a failure like I did. So after I was in a corporate role for a while, I decided to quit. Actually, it was a job that I loved, to start my own company with an intention to really eradicate bad behavior by equipping leaders and their teams with the skills and tools that they needed to actually address it.
Right.
So then started this company, and here I am almost 13 years later, the CEO and founder of an institute. So pretty
Fantastic.
like if I take a look back.
Yeah. I want to jump back. Yeah, I want to jump backwards for a second on some of this because I think there's some good leadership lessons in here. First thing I heard that stuck out to me was you went to that organization looking to be an educator. They said not yet because you didn't have a credential, essentially. And they opened up another door and you stepped through it. And I think that is so crucial for leaders, especially aspiring, because you were early in your career, right? We think this is what I want to do and I'm going to go after this. And if this job isn't exactly what I want, I'm going to walk. You didn't. So that took some humility, some vulnerability. Can you talk to us kind of like your mindset when you decided to take that role?
Yes, absolutely. I remember sitting there talking to someone else I knew who worked in that organization as a frontline manager. I will never forget this, Sean. We had dinner together, and I said to her, I want you to talk me into taking this position, and I want you to talk me out of it.
Nice.
Because I really wanted to hear both sides.
Yeah.
And even though one might think it was a mistake having that role, because I failed. I was not successful when I quit. There are 2 considerations here. First of all, especially for all of you who are listening, that, as you said, Sean, it takes a little bit of humility and oh my gosh, they want me to do this. I hadn't even considered that. One of the things that has helped me to go from being that brand new bedside nurse to being the CEO of a company is that I've always been a risk taker. I've always thought, you know what? Why other people do this? Why can't I? And I also know that even if it's not the right fit, I'm going to learn something that's going to help me with that next role. And that was how I looked at it now.
Yeah.
Sean, if I would not have been in that role, I would not be doing the work that I'm doing now.
Exactly.
It was a gift to me to have that experience so that I can be more credible right now to the leaders who I'm working with to say, I know how you feel. Yeah. I didn't know what to say to these people at 2:00 in the morning when I'm getting a call that they're huffing and puffing and stomping down the hallway or threatening each other. I didn't know how to handle it either. Well, now I do because I had that experience. And so, yeah, and I think if you're considering a leadership role, or, you said, Sean, I wanted to go through this door and it wasn't open. They opened a different door. It's about taking a risk.
It is.
A calculated risk.
Sure.
But just know that even if it's not the right fit for you, what can you learn that's going to help you and apply that learning to another role?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that we talk about in our coaching all the time is we will make mistakes. We're human. It's going to happen. Yes. If we learn from them, it's just a mistake. If we don't learn from them, it becomes a failure. So I'm going to challenge you for a second, Renee. Yeah, I don't think you failed in those 14 months. There may have been some mistakes in there and things, but so just those 14 months, I love how you said that's instrumental to bring you where you are today.
Mhm.
What were the two leadership lessons you received in those 14 months, whether from good news or bad news, mistakes or otherwise? What were your two leadership lessons?
One of the mistakes I made was when I really saw what was happening in this department. There were clinical issues. There some of my nurses were not competent. Okay, it was clear that we were not providing
Mm-hmm.
high quality care. It was clear that the way they treated each other was awful, and the unit itself was, I'm just going to say, ugly. The walls were drab. It was dirty. It never looked clean. There were no pictures on the walls, and it just looked like gloom and doom when you walked in. And the mistake I made was I tried to tackle everything at the same time.
Wow.
I tried to make the department pretty. I had somebody come in and paint, and we got pictures, and I had the housekeeping like, oh my gosh, this has not been cleaned in like 10 years. You could tell.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to do that. I tried to work on the clinical issues. I tried to work on the behavioral issues, but because I wasn't equipped, I didn't even know how to do that. So I did not prioritize. So leadership lesson learned. When you say step into a role in a department, in a company, whatever that is, give yourself some time to really assess
Yeah.
all of the issues, and then, for goodness sakes, prioritize them. I should have been focusing on my clinical outcomes, the quality care,
Right.
and starting to tackle some of those behavioral issues, and worry about making the department pretty later. That was certainly not above some of the other issues. So that's
Great
one of the
lesson.
first lessons. Yeah, it was, and I share that with a lot of people right now when I know they're starting in their role. Just take some time. Don't make any quick decisions. Just assess. I'd say the second lesson that I learned is it's important for the leader to have uncomfortable conversations with their team. I was so afraid of telling my nurses or my PCTs, patient care technicians, giving them constructive feedback. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to do it well. It was during the last nursing crisis that we had, and I was afraid if I said anything to them, they would quit on me.
Wow.
And so I did what was comfortable for me. I used silence as a strategy. I did not address it. But then I would talk about them to my, colleagues, like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe, or I'd go and talk to my friends, like, can you believe this person did this? I wasn't willing to have honest conversations with my team when I saw or heard very negative behaviors and performances. So we have to, as leaders, have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, having honest conversations with our team.
I agree. What I like in how you shared that, Renee, was you actually articulated there are a few different things that put you in that box, right? You talked about the fear because of where the workforce was. It was a semi-nursing crisis. You didn't want to perpetuate it. You talked about the fear of not knowing what to say or how to actually have that conversation effectively. There are other people. We all have our different reasons, right? Some people are just fearful. They're people pleasers, and I have to make everybody happy. And so I'm not going to give them real feedback and such. Listeners, I want you to understand no matter what the fear is, because there's 15 to 20 different types of things causing you to not have these conversations. The conversations are a gift to you and a gift to them when you do it from the right place, meaning your heart's got to be right.
Yes.
If your heart's right, it works.
There's a book that I highly recommend if this is something that you struggle with, called Radical Candor by Kim Scott.
Great book.
And it basically is you have to care enough about people to tell them the truth. And many of us leaders, I think, are people pleasers. And yeah, I'm one of them. However, it's having the courage to sit down with someone and be incredibly honest with them under this umbrella of respect. I'm telling you this because I care about you and I care about our team. And, it's a psychological reality that exists in all human beings that we avoid pain. It's part of our survival. We avoid pain. While confronting someone, especially if you're concerned about how they're going to react, will they retaliate against me, is painful.
Mm-hmm.
So we avoid that conversation. And what I encourage anyone who's listening to do is when you feel that uncomfortableness, like I feel it in my gut,
Right.
is just to say, okay, this is normal that I feel this way. I'm going to have that conversation anyway, because it's an important conversation to have. And I work with mostly leaders, and I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with leaders about their reluctance to be honest with their team. And, you
Every
just
day.
give them the tools. This is how you have the conversation. This is when you say it, how you say it, how you follow up, that they're more willing to do that.
They
And
are.
it's not easy.
Yeah, we coach around that regularly, and it's interesting. What I've found is, we'll prep them for a difficult conversation. They'll go have it, and then we'll talk afterwards in the next
Yeah.
coaching session. And the leader's evaluation of whether it was successful is how it was received by the other person. If they were happy with what they heard, that's not the measure.
No.
The measure is, did they hear you? Do they understand what they need to do differently? And can you take them down that path? That's a
Exactly.
people pleaser side of how they received it. You can't judge it by how it's received. You judge it by the results it brings.
Absolutely. I've had many conversations myself with leaders who they finally sit down and they have an honest conversation with one of their employees, and we'll talk about it. And they'll say, I'll never forget this one manager finally sat down with an employee who was pretty tough. And this employee stormed out of her office, was angry about it, but then circled back 3 days later and said to her, I've given this a lot of thought, and you were right. And I apologize for how I reacted. And I was like, that's the win.
That's
right
powerful.
there.
Yeah.
That circle back. But then you need to see evidence that they're going to actually adapt their behavior after. And it might not just be one conversation. I think that's one of the common mistakes leaders make, is they think one conversation changes someone's behavior.
No.
Most of the time, it does not. So it's the follow-up with that employee. And so that's where the change will occur, is over a series of conversations. But then you do have to get to a point where, okay, we've had 57 conversations about this. I haven't seen any improvement. That's
What's
a different
causing that?
conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's pick back up on your story. So you started the Healthy Workforce Institute. What were you seeing in healthcare that was kind of like that painful driver for you? And why did you think you would be the one to actually begin to address it through the Institute?
Yes. It was an aha moment. It was when I had this corporate position, and I was responsible for professional development of about 10,000 nurses. Student nurse, experience, a new nurse residency program, preceptor program, certification, advanced degrees, all of that. And I found myself doing a lot of focus groups with nurses, with students, new nurses, preceptors, all of them, and speaking to a lot of audiences. And it was really taking a look at what they needed to be successful so that we could revise our programs and develop, professional development opportunities. Sean, all they wanted to talk about was how badly the other nurses treated them. And it reminded me of my own experiences. When I was a new nurse, I was bullied by someone and almost quit. And I remember, the conversation was, well, that's just the way it is in nursing. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, we have been saying this for a century. And in that moment, I basically said, enough is enough. You know what? We've been talking about it forever. Nobody's doing anything about it. Gosh darn it, I'm going to do something about it. And I started really just speaking about it. I've found myself in front of audiences and large audiences, and people would always, come up to me after and say, are you a professional speaker? That was the best presentation. I'm like, me? Nah, I just get on stage and talk. And I've, worked in education, so I know how to deliver, a message. And I thought, other people do this. Other people are speakers. Why not me?
Yeah.
So again, I took a leap of faith, quit that job to start the company with an intention to address bullying and incivility because I had just seen my share of badness, decided to do something about it. And from there, it was speaking. And then people wanted more. So you expand your speaking, to workshops and seminars, and
Right.
started hosting our own events, and then developed our academy. We have a lot of online programs. Most of them are a hybrid program. And now we do a lot of consulting. So we'll actually go into an organization, work hip to hip with their leaders and their entire team. So yeah, it just expanded from there.
Fantastic. And so your first book was Do No Harm. And I assume that kind of came out of the workshops you were doing, some of the content you were creating. And I know that had an impact. The more recent one is Enough, which I know has a longer subtitle. So what's the actual full title of Enough?
Yes, Enough is Eradicate Bullying and Incivility and Healthcare Strategies for Frontline Leaders. And when I talk about, so the Do No Harm book, it's Do No Harm Applies to Nurses 2, Strategies to Protect and Bully-Proof Yourself at Work. That was the work that I did in my doctoral program, where I taught senior nursing students how to protect and bully-proof themselves before they started their first job.
Okay.
Also, I wanted to make sure that I was addressing the new generation of bullies coming into healthcare. I wanted to make sure they didn't become the bullies. And so that was really focused on that nurse dealing with another nurse at 2:00 in the morning who's being incredibly disruptive. But then when I wrote Enough, that was the book I wish I would have had when I was a leader. I wish I would have had that book. And actually, chapter 1, I talk about that experience being a brand new frontline leader and how challenging it was for me. I always say, if that was the book, if I would have had that book when I was that leader, I wouldn't have made the mistakes that I made. But then again, Sean, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
It's all an evolution in how we grow and how we receive things. And what I like about that title and the transition in the two books, I like how the first one is really focused in on you and what you need to do for you. You didn't use the word like armor or shield. That's almost what I was envisioning, right? Protect myself from that. But then the second one is, okay, now you're a leader. What are you going to do about this? Because if you accept it, that's on you. And indirectly, you actually become that bully, don't you?
You do, by being a bystander. It's what it is. Like, if you don't speak up, you're witness to it, but you've become a bystander. And we know that there are more people who witness bullying and incivility than experience it. And if we could just tap into those people who witness it, like I always give this example, you're walking down the hallway and all of a sudden you overhear and see Tina screaming and yelling at Amy. What do? Like, ooh, 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 you turn and go the other way.
Right.
And you're thankful that Tina's not screaming and yelling at you. And instead, we need to walk right up to Tina and say, time out. You're screaming at Amy. You need to stop. So we need, and especially if you're the leader, that is your responsibility to address any incidents of disruptive behaviors in your organization. And just, recognize that we all have a responsibility, because even if you're a witness today, you could become a target tomorrow.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's this thing that we think about. It's like, so your Tina, Amy thing. It's like, well, at least it's happening to Amy, not me. If you accept it, it will come on you eventually.
Yes.
They're not going to stop because they don't care about titles. They don't care about position. They don't care about people. That's why they're doing it that way.
Yes, unfortunately.
Yeah. So today you're doing a lot of consulting with the Healthy Workforce Institute. I know a majority of it's still in healthcare, but it applies in every other realm. So what are these organizations coming to you with as like their pain point? And then what are some of the things you're consulting around in that?
Yes. So organizations, healthcare organizations will reach out, and they'll basically, the story usually is they have a department, or they have sometimes it's the whole service line. So our two most popular service lines are like maternal child health, so labor and delivery, NICU, postpartum. And the other one is surgical services. So you have the PACU, the OR, maybe same day, where they either get some data. They've done some type of pulse survey, employee engagement. They do their own survey, and they're looking at things like retention. They'll look at turnover, and they'll look at the feedback they're getting from their employees. And that feedback is that bullying and incivility are rampant. And they'll reach out to us and say, here's our problem. And we, through conversation with them, really try to get to what's really happening and what's the impact and why is this important for you to address now. And usually what we hear, Sean, is that they can't keep people there. And I remember having a conversation with somebody not too long ago who said they even brought in an experienced nurse in a specialty department, and they're hard to come by. And she lasted 6 weeks because she said, I cannot believe you people tolerate these behaviors. I'm not willing to tolerate this. I'm out. And she left. And so usually by the time they reach out to us, their pain point is like 10 out of 10. And I often think, I wish you would have come to us sooner, like earlier, because we could have stopped the bleeding, okay, if we could have intervened earlier. But usually what we hear from our clients is that they receive information that shows bullying and incivility are happening, and they're losing people because of it.
It's huge. I think about the corporate culture, the non-healthcare corporate culture. The word is different. They don't use the word bullying. They might use incivility. It's more just that toxic person.
Yes.
But no matter what word you give to define it, it's there. It's there in every workforce. It's present in communities. It's present in families. And it still comes back to people skills, right? Of how do we actually handle and deal with people. And, an interesting thing, I'm sure you run into this. I'd be curious to hear when we're coaching organizations and coaching leaders, we hear them talking about these different pieces, right? And they'll talk about that person. Like they can identify this is the person that's causing all these problems. And they always say, I can't do anything about it. I can't fire them. I can't move them. I can't. And I'll always simply say, why can't you? And they can never really define it. Sometimes they'll have something, with HR, we got to go through all these different steps and do all these different things. But it's the phrase that we use of choose who you lose. You can choose to do something about that bully and get rid of them. Or if you don't, like that specialist nurse, if you choose not to do anything, you're going to lose all stars.
Yes, you are.
So as a leader, you choose who you lose. And so I know today with your consulting, you're making an impact in that. And in our notes today, listeners, you can find out how to get a hold of the Healthy Workforce Institute if you want to tap into Renee and what she's doing. I know also today, Renee, you yourself have your own podcast.
I do.
What is the name of that? What's the purpose in it? What are you doing there?
Sure. It's called Coffee Break, Breaking the Cycle of Bullying and Incivility in Healthcare, one cup at a time. And what we focus on, Sean, is how to address workplace bullying and incivility so that you can cultivate a healthy, respectful, and professional and kinder work culture. We focus primarily on leaders and equipping the leaders with the skills and tools that they need, because we have found that you also need to equip the people on the front line, like, whether you're in healthcare or not, your employees, they need to be equipped too. But if they're equipped and their leader is not, you will never cultivate a healthy work culture. You've got to start with the leadership team, and then you equip your employees. But that's what we do on the podcast. We talk about how to address disruptive behaviors with leaders.
Fantastic. So how frequent is that?
We release a podcast every Wednesday morning.
Okay. And so is that Renee teaching content? Do you have guests? What's the approach with it?
I'd say 75% of the time I am interviewing another leader. We've had nurse executives, we've had chief medical officer, we have chief wellness officer, so some physicians. We'll interview executives, we'll interview nurse managers at the front line. It's mostly, all people who work in healthcare, at least for now. And Sometimes though, I'll do a solo. So I did a solo where I just talked about graduate nurses and how we're losing them. The turnover rate for new graduated nurses is through the roof.
Right.
So I talked about this. I just did an episode because I'm like, I need to get this message out. So I'll mix it up and I'll do a solo act every now and then.
Fantastic. All right. I want to transition for 1 second because I know a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, and building a business is huge. You've been building the Institute. So just talk to us for a few minutes about how the Institute has grown, what your reach is today with your work, how big your team is, and just kind of the business owner side for a little bit.
Yes, it's been an interesting journey. I'm a good nurse. I'm cardiac, neuro. I'm a good nurse. I'm a, good educator. And then and I'm a good speaker.
Mm-hmm.
Then I decided that I want to start a company. And that's completely different. And I've had to learn how to actually become the CEO of a company. And it started again as me. I hired a graphic designer to help me with my logo and my branding, and she's still with us today. And like I said, it'll be 13 years at the end of May that we've had this company. My husband was in law enforcement, and so he retired to help me because he was coming home from work and helping me with the business. So we're actually at 12 people right now.
Awesome.
So we have a core team. We have 2 full-time employees, and then we have 4 consultants who speak, who do the consulting work with me. So yeah, we're a team of 12, soon to be 13. We're hiring a program manager right now. And it's just really grown organically. One of the key strategies for me, Sean, that I would encourage anyone who's listening who is either starting their own business, has their own business, or is aspiring, is that I've always had a business coach.
Mm-hmm.
I've always sought coaching because I've never done this before. And I wanted to not, make all the mistakes and then learn from them. I wanted to learn from other people's mistakes and having a coach along the way. Now, I've had different coaches because as I've evolved, my coaches have evolved. And I'll give you an example. This morning, I had a call with my business coach and we talked about finances. I'm learning how to, forecast out the next 12 months to see, can I hire someone else? And what will that do to my bottom line revenue and we talked all about that today. Like, how do I
That's
not
fantastic.
just look in the rear view mirror saying, oh, the accounting, bookkeeping, this is the revenue we brought in. This is, but look ahead to say, are we healthy 6 months from now and a year from now? So I wouldn't have been able to figure that out on my own. I guess I could have, but having a business coach just helps decrease the learning curve.
It does. And that's the aspect. Leaders are learners, right? And we always have to be learning, listening to podcasts, talking to coaches. And obviously as an executive coach, I'm big on coaching and you coach in your realm and things like that. But I also want our listeners to understand that there are different coaches for different things, even though it may sound the same. So for instance, somebody may say that we are a business coach at Re-Energize Professional Coaching. We talk to people in businesses, but we're there truly about their leadership, right? Who are they as a person? How are they gifted? How are they leading? How can they lead more effectively? We're zeroed in on that for their personal leadership, leading themselves, as well as their people and their teams, their families, and their life. You're in there and you're coaching people around how to create a certain culture and how to deal with bullies and things like that. The business coach, you talked about one right now that's on the finance side. They have them around strategy. They have them around marketing, all these different things. But there's so many people out there who can just really share their wisdom and save us making all the mistakes. But we have to be open and say, I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to invest in myself for the good of our organization.
Yes, it is one of the healthiest strategies that you can make. And that is finding someone who you can hire as a coach. And I love how you said you have different coaches for different things. But to start a business is one thing, but to grow and scale that business and still have a life.
Correct.
That's one thing. One of the commitments that I've made to my coach this year, and I'm actually getting a little nervous about it, is I promised, I committed, okay, so there's no going back, and he encouraged this. I'm going on vacation in July, and I've committed to not working on vacation. And Sean, I've had this business, like I said, for almost 13 years, and I've never not worked on vacation.
Mm-hmm.
I use just a couple of hours in the morning before everybody else gets up or before my husband gets up, and I am not working on this vacation. And he's holding me accountable to that. And so, I highly recommend finding a business coach or any coach, depending on what you're looking for as an outcome. But it's really been instrumental for my growth.
That's great. And part of that's just putting good people around you, right? So it's going to be easier than you think. Been there, done that 2 years ago for the first time.
I'm nervous. What am I going to do?
But it's going to be good. And here's why. I've met a couple of people on your team at the conferences, but I don't know your team.
Yes.
You have full faith and confidence in them.
Yeah, I do.
And it's going to be okay. Like most businesses, there's not an emergency that can happen.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm saying this to everybody who's entrepreneurs. And so my wife and I, in the same vein, Renee, when we started our business, we said, we will own it. It will not own us.
Yeah.
And we've stuck to that. I'm fortunate where with executive coaching, work with corporations, we're kind of a quote unquote business week, right? Mm-hmm. You're 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. Maybe one weekend a month, I open my computer.
Wow.
Maybe.
Okay. I want to be you. Okay.
No, you don't.
In my near future. And that's what I'm working on.
Because stuff is always there, right? But we got to pick it up. And so, I'm glad your business has been growing. Listeners, I encourage you to check out the show notes to find out how you can tap into Renee. Renee, we always finish with the same question at the Intentional Leader podcast because we like those quick intentional tips. So what is something our listeners can do intentionally today to lead more effectively?
Thank you for asking. It's one of my simple, practical, but powerful strategies. I call it my bookends. As a leader, you only have control over 2 times during your workday. Okay? It's what you do when you first walk into work and what you do on your way out. Anything in between, it's a crapshoot. You never know what you're going to get. You may think your day is going to go this way and nope, goes another way. Connect with one of your employees in a meaningful way on your way into work. So as you're walking through your department, or if you're not in a department, like I'm thinking in a hospital or an ambulatory care center, one of your employees at the start of your day and one of your employees at the end of your day, and just have a 30-second or minute conversation. How are you? How's your mom? Bring in something for that personal connection, because you mentioned this earlier, like everything we do is about the relationships that we have with each other. And that helps you to build a relationship with your team. And it also helps you to put your team first, just on your way in and on your way out. That's it.
Yep.
That's my
Fantastic.
tip.
I love the tip. Listeners, put that into action. Renee, thank you so much for joining us on the Intentional Leader podcast. And we hope that everything keeps growing for you at the Healthy Workforce Institute, because it's having results, that it's cutting the bullying out. And so listeners, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Intentional Leader podcast presented by Renee Professional Coaching. Be sure to see the show notes for links to Renee Professional Coaching and links to contact our guests. Now, hit that subscribe button so that you are alerted with every new episode of the Intentional Leader podcast.